Hello, this is Sociology 217. This is Group K, and this is Group Discussion 1, and I'm Audra Flum.
Emily Stravon,
Rachel Steinhoff,
McKaylee Sides,
Zoha Kadir,
JD Spillman.
Okay, so number one is how have theories of race and ethnicity evolved over time, and how might theory have been informed by contemporary racial dynamics, and how might evolving theories of race and ethnicity inform contemporary thought related to racial dynamics in the United States?
Okay, so I guess I'll start. So when it comes to how theories of race and ethnicity have evolved over time, like in chapter 3, it kind of addresses how like race used to be seen in basically all theories as like a biological thing. And they thought there was scientific meaning to like race, but now it's more like contemporary and more about like the social construction of race.
It's basically how you fit into society, I guess. Kind of like
Yeah, so it's not like you're not biologically inferior,
Yeah.
it's just more of like a construction of inferiority.
I think even back then they talked about in chapter 4 how the assignment of racial categories like was a thing on birth certificates, and oh gosh, I can't remember who it was. Someone
tried to fight it in court because she was mixed race. She was white and black.
That. I don't remember.
But they denied letting her change her ethnicity.
She was
to
only,
race to
like-
white on her birth certificate.
Yeah, wasn't she only like 1/32 black?
Something like that.
Right, yeah, it was 1982 and 83 Susie Fitch.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she was trying to change her classification from black to white.
And they denied it.
Because she was less than 1/32 Negro, and they wouldn't let her change.
Yeah, so that can go into how like theories informed by contemporary dynamics. So this is obviously like a real life example of like a case that took place, and that kind of ties into how like we don't really see race as a scientific thing anymore.
Yeah,
and that
I
was
mean,
like
it's
one of
not-
the first things to
It's
challenge it.
not a birth certificate. I mean, you still get asked like what ethnicity you are, like if,
Yeah.
like when you're
I
filling
mean,
out
obviously
the
it's
form.
still like visible,
Yeah.
but
like
it's not
like a sign like that on a birth certificate.
there's no
It's
like,
not as like it's focused on.
well, there's no like scientific backing for what your personality is going to be like based on your
Right.
race.
Yeah.
I feel like the only time like your race really should come into play is regarding like medical stuff, because you know like
Yeah.
races do have like different types of
Yeah.
things, but like I know black people are more prone to have like sickle cell or whatever.
Yeah, and
Blood.
heart disease
Yeah.
too.
So like stuff like that would matter when it comes to like
Treatment.
you know if you're going to like a hospital and need like
Yeah.
treatment like she said. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's the only time it should really
Be
matter.
like
Like other than that,
biological.
other than that,
Yeah.
it's basically just straight social construct.
And even that's not like completely. It's more about like culture as well. Like what you like. I know like for like Indian and Pakistani people, like we have really high blood pressure, but that's because a lot of our food is very like fatty and oil based. So.
Well, it's just like whites, we're at high risk for skin cancer just because
We're so pale.
the
Yeah.
pigment in our skin.
Because I think that was the first reading we did read for class was
Yeah, we're talking
about the
about
melanin.
melanin
And it's
whatever. And
specifically made to protect your skin from UV
Yeah.
rays and skin
Yeah.
cancer, which is why Africa and like South American countries are
How
people with
blessed like
darker,
yeah.
and then Europeans are white.
We're
'cause
so
got
fair.
bipoles.
Yeah, so I think also with like considering how the theories have evolved to become more like social and contemporary, that kind of ties into like the thought, like contemporary thought about race to be more like social. Like we focus on the more social aspects now
Right.
yeah, because like
of like what it means to be black, what it means to be a minority in this country.
Because like in the beginning of like the New World, it was just focusing on the color. You look different from me. You're
Right.
like you're not civilized because you don't look like me.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it's more like one of the theories, like social capital, more kind of like your status and like economic standings and like things of that nature, just like where you fit in society. I mean, there's still judgment to an extent, but I feel like it's not based on the color of your skin as much anymore as it is based on like wealth, academic, like educational background. I don't even know how big your house is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I
the
think
things
that
you
goes to
wear.
show that like
Yeah.
the a lot of the racial problems in our country aren't as like at face value. They're more like built into our system, and
Right.
all of these
Yeah.
theories kind of address that. Like
Because
it goes into like your education,
It's
where
a
you
social
live,
construct.
and how like all of that. It's all intertwined.
Yeah, and
It's
that's
almost more like it went towards like materialistic and like
Yeah.
what you wear, what you have,
So that
and like that more.
would that be more like cultural capital then? Like the brands you wear?
More of like high.
Yeah.
Yeah,
status
if you're
wearing-
culture.
Yeah.
I feel like what you said earlier kind of ties into systemic racism, though, in our country is, you know, we focus more on wealth and the clothes you wear in the house you're in, your education, but that is still very based on, like, low-income communities, the projects,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
pushing back when, like, discrimination was no longer legal, but pushing especially black people into the urban areas. White people moved to the suburbs, and that's why nicer schools in the suburbs were schools in urban areas, like higher high school dropout rates. And so now we do, I feel like we like to say that it's more based on like wealth and stuff, but at the end of the day it is, but also we kind of force, it's systemic that white people are wealthier in general.
Going back to the system, like you said, I feel like, you know, it also has to do with the human capital theory, because a lot of minorities are targeted like differently based off of like police and stuff like that, and it says like even in the definition, you know, like your criminal history has something to do with that. So like if you get targeted at an unproportional rate and you know you get like accused of something you didn't do, you could lose your job over that, and then next you know your human capital is going down.
Yeah. Like I think in chapter 4 they kind of also address like what you were saying, how like you know, what kind of minority you are kind of affects like how you're treated. Like there's obviously like certain like stereotypes with each minority, and there's like the model minority myth where like Asian minorities are considered to be like better because they like conform and they are like smarter or whatever. But it's kind of like this kind of myth perpetuated by white people.
I mean, like, it talks about in chapter 4, page 27, like the rates of people attending college. I mean, just like to back it up with numbers, I mean, in 2013, 32% of people 25 years and older had completed 4 years or more of college in the United States. Among non-Hispanic whites, this figure is a little bit higher at 35%. I mean, it kind of just like shows numbers that like people do think that whites, I don't know how to say it where it doesn't sound.
I think it kind of goes back to like the human capital theory, or which
You know
like
what I'm
the
trying to
amount
say,
of, yeah,
right?
the amount of earnings affects
Mhm.
the differences in education, and that affects your work experience with that, which then goes on generation to generation.
Yeah.
So it's like really hard to kind of get out of that cycle because of all of like it, you know, one thing leads to another, and it just keeps affecting and you know going through this cycle.
Well, it's almost like the like social networking too. It's like who you know.
Yeah,
exactly.
So like obviously we're all placed in the system at different levels, and it's really hard to break through those levels because like the system has not changed. Even though like the ideologies or whatever people have changed, the infrastructure, like how we like sure like racism isn't necessarily in law anymore, but it is in how we interact. So like if you come from a low income family, it's gonna be a lot harder for you to get a good education, and like you can't like I feel like a lot of people are always like, well, discrimination isn't really a thing anymore, so I don't understand like why they don't work harder and like
it's like
get better
they're probably already
jobs.
working like 3 jobs.
But it's like I think there was I don't know where in the book it is, but it's talking about like equity and like versus equality, where like equality is like okay, we all have like technically the same opportunities, but you don't have the same access to them because you have to acknowledge that we like the system is placed at different levels.
Exactly.
Yeah, and tying into like education and human capital, especially with college, like I feel like people now would be like, well, everyone has the equal opportunity to get a college degree, but 2 days ago in my English class we talked about an article where it was like top 15 worst colleges to go to, and all of them were HBCs, which are historically black colleges. So even though you know we're saying everyone's on like a level playing field, like people who all like if you're in college and get a degree on a level playing field, at the same time we're still discriminating against people of color and black people specifically, considering that they were rated the top like the worst 15 colleges
like
to
the
go
fact
to.
of the matter is like we're not at an equal playing field.
No, we're not.
No.
Well, and
I think all of this is tied to the second question. I just want to say that so it's like they know.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back, like, even how you were saying, like, about the, like, being incarcerated and everything. Like, it doesn't put everyone on an equal playing field, because it even talks about in chapter 4 how, like, black men are 8 times more likely to be incarcerated than
for sure.
white men, which leads to more black men entering the workforce with criminal records. That does not put you on an equal playing field at all, so that's,
Right.
like,
We talked a lot about that in my courts class and how like the system is very unfair. There's
Yeah.
like a lot of charts and things. I don't know numbers off the top of my head, but last semester into corrections, whatever. And like if you think about it, like the population that we have, like sure, blacks are not the bigger number if you like put groups together, but they're the bigger number. Like they're the larger group in the prison system, like even in
Yeah.
like county jails and things like that, they are the majority. So I think that just kind of shows that they're like is
it really brings out like
yeah.
the racial discrimination
Right, yeah.
that does go on, and that's like not something that you can just look over.
Right.
Like it's very
Yeah.
It's still
latent.
very much
Yes.
ingrained into our society.
Yes.
And I feel like that ties into, it's on social media a lot, is the argument of getting rid of the box to check on an application if you've ever
Yeah.
committed a felony, because of especially like drug felonies and how disproportionately that is people of color, especially
Yeah.
black men, and how that box just like completely, the playing field goes from like white people
Yeah.
here, and then after that it just like it
I
drops.
remember talking about that. I don't know where, but that sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah, because I think it's like one of those things. Like I don't know how true this statistic is, but like back in high school, one of my teachers would always point it out. Like white people and black people use drugs at pretty much the same rate, but black people are still incarcerated more for it because obviously there's still that prejudice that.
Well, and then it comes in like with how wealthy you are too, and
Yeah.
you know, it's like all like it ties into like that social networking again.
That ties into like basically the war on drugs, like because nowadays you see in the news like the opioid crisis, like people are like, oh, you know, it's a crisis, we need to, you know, get all these medical people to come help out. But then like you look back at into the 80s, like the crack epidemic in the black community, they weren't like trying to help them get over it, they were just throwing them in jail instead. Like and then like the Clintons came up with like the 3-strike policy, and like that just made everything even worse.
Yeah.
So like just like based off of your race and your community, like the way people look at drug users is different.
Well, yeah, and with this 3-strike rule, when that came out, it also stop and frisk became legal.
Yeah.
So it was like 3 strikes came like that if you were in a low income,
Exactly.
primarily black community. Your 3 strikes came a lot quicker than if you're in an affluent white community.
And I even think today, like, from just like social media and like common knowledge, we see that they're like people who are wealthy have the harder drugs, and like most of the time it is white people who
Well,
are
like a
like
slap on the wrist when
Yeah.
they do get caught. It's like, are you serious?
especially like artists or celebrities, like they can post it
Yeah.
all over social
It's
media
just
and
like-
do whatever they
They're
want.
not
Right,
doing
and they
anything.
get away with
But
it.
yeah,
Yeah, we have millions of people sitting in jail for small weed offenses.
yeah.
You have like literally celebrities with like coke, and you're like,
Or like luggages of it.
Exactly.
And then, like after something tragic happens to them, then they get caught. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's only on the other end.
So we've been talking a lot about the theories. So I was gonna say, just so we can outright. So is there a single theoretical framework from which you tend to engage? I think we've all kind of like talked about how they all tie into each other. And do you think these theories provide a strong theory of race and ethnicity from a global perspective? And should we have theories of race and ethnicity from a global perspective if that's possible? I think in a way, yes, like these kind of apply globally. But there's a lot of different races and ethnicities in the world,
Exactly.
obviously.
Yeah.
But I think like the basics of them can be applied to basically any country, because like there's always a history of oppression of one that based in race and ethnicity in basically any country you go to.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, like it's definitely shows up in every country in the world. But like I feel like the difference with America is the fact that we have so many different cultures and ethnicities in this country compared to, you know, like let's say you fly like to China or something, like most of the people there will be, Chinese, but you come to
Yeah.
America, you see a lot of
Yeah.
every different type of person.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's
Especially,
why
like,
it's
physically.
stronger in
Yeah.
America
Well,
than
I
it is
feel like
everywhere else.
America's like, oh, we're not like segregating anyone, but like there is, it's in it.
Well,
You
it's I
see
think
it
like
all
what's
the
unique
time.
about America is how much we emphasize freedom, but like how
Exactly.
that kind of just means freedom
Right?
for white people.
Yeah.
So
And I think it really does like focus on the social capital theory, especially in America, is because like if you look at a very highly populated city, you definitely see the different like kind of like we talked about earlier, but the different areas where this part is really wealthy and this part is not as wealthy, and you can even see like the different
Like if you take like, per se, like New York, if you take like the Upper East
Manhattan
Side, like
versus the
Manhattan.
Bronx.
Yeah, exactly. Or like,
or even in Omaha where it's like
Yeah.
North Over versus
Yeah.
South Over versus
Yeah.
West Over.
And even just for us specifically, our high schools are like 5 minutes away from each other, and yours is like 90% white, and mine is only 49% white, 51% minority. And just like the difference within a few miles of each other in like a suburban area of the Twin Cities.
And even this is so our district is made up of 3 high schools, and we actually went over like one time all of the different boundary lines that they set, and it was so crazy to me because they literally set them based on the like not the income but where like all of these different people live, and so it's like.
So you buy like neighborhood,
So
like
yeah,
the neighborhood with like
neighborhoods.
$400,000 houses, neighborhoods with
so you have,
$100,000
like,
houses.
potentially, like a version of redlining.
Well, like
Yeah.
it's like
Like-
politics. They look at all
Yeah.
that
too.
all the time to figure out who they want to target. Like,
Right.
this minority's in this area, and then
Right,
it
I
shows.
mean, even in like going like way back in like West Texas, like Texas is big in football, like high school football, and I mean it's a true story. Like many people know about like the pyramid in Odessa, and like there were issues when one of the schools closed and they had to open another one because they were trying to like have kids from a certain area come play football because they had a special talent, but maybe it's just because they thought that people of, I don't want to make it sound like bad, but like, or I don't know really how to put it, but like Pyramid was trying to have a mostly, like their football team is composed mostly of people of color, just like maybe they think they have the athletic abilities, but like there was definitely like segregation. I remember they talked about like one side there was all these big rich houses in a mall across the railroad tracks, and you're basically in the ghetto. So like, I mean, it is a big social capital thing, with like how you present yourself, what you own, but it also is your human capital about like how much your parents make, what education they have, what education you can afford, and things like that. And I do think it is still, it's not as big as an issue today as it was then, but it is still something that people do need to consider.
So, moving on to the third question. So, what are some possible consequences of engaging with a single theory at face value? And are there hidden dangers in taking a specific approach that might erase the importance or experiences associated with race and ethnicity in the United States?
I feel like taking anything in life at face value and not comparing it to everything is dangerous.
Yeah, I think like you can't. Sorry, didn't
No, it's okay.
Especially when it comes to race and ethnicity, like it's something that's so ingrained and has so many different facets to it that if you just look at one theory, you're ignoring how like complicated it is and like how deep it really runs, especially in the United States. Like it's a country basically built on racism.
But my question is, do we really need a theory? Like, I understand you need to be able to like, I guess, classify people into groups, but like I told you guys earlier, I don't have a very big opinion on matters like this whatsoever, because I think a person is a person, and like a person who has less than me, I'm gonna consider them a friend just as much as I would someone who's in my own like class or above me, just like as long as I can have like a decent conversation with them, or like I don't really have.
But I think like the problem with like looking at it that way is like in an ideal world, that's like what you
Right,
we want, right?
correct.
Like you want to be
Clearly
like,
that's
okay,
not
like color doesn't
possible.
matter, I don't care. But the thing is like even
It
if we don't
does.
want it to, it
Yeah,
really
right,
does.
no matter what.
It makes
It's
all
not-
the
it's-
difference.
it's
There's
not
always
something
gonna
you can
be like
escape.
someone that there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like
how it makes like everyone else feel is like I think it's an important thing. Just like I don't know.
Which I know people they have trouble
Yeah.
being open to things like that. So
Yeah.
that's why they go back to classification because it's like
yeah, because I
like
think the
control
thing is
and
like
you're
it's
like,
too
okay,
far.
for that.
It's too much a part of our system that we can
Just get rid
not
of
see it.
Yeah.
Like
People just,
especially
they
in
have to
like
know.
yeah, because in chapter 4 it says like the colorblind privilege or ideology and how like it maintains white privilege by like negating racial inequality, and it kind of like if you are like I don't see color, you're basically ignoring that like this country is built on
Like,
like
I'm-
seeing color and that
yeah,
people
I
are.
mean-
I'm not saying like you see
No,
privilege,
like
but like
I'm just gonna so like I'm not saying that like I don't see it, but I'm just choosing to not acknowledge it because I personally think that it's something
Yeah.
that we could attempt to move past. Like we already have been clearly, like I mean there are still issues of discrimination today, but I think it's something that I personally choose to like.
yeah, and I think you can like.
You know,
I think you can choose not to acknowledge it on a personal level. Like,
yeah,
when
but
you're
not
with
as like
somebody.
not as like a society though.
Like
Yeah.
it's
I feel
definitely
like
something
that's-
that needs to be taken. Yeah.
I feel like that's a big problem. I feel like specifically right now, you could kind of tie this into our presidency, that white people, we as like white people, we kind of want to say that it's not as big of an issue and we shouldn't focus on it, but I feel like we fail to realize how we're not really very far away from Jim Crow. Like that was
Right.
literally our
Yeah.
grandparents, and depending on how old your parents are, like that was their day and age. Like we're barely a generation or two removed
Yeah.
from such systemic discrimination and prejudice. But I feel like we're trying to be like, no, it's over, we're done, we should move past it, because no one wants to really admit the fact that like it wasn't that long. It was like
Yeah.
60 years ago now that it's 2020. Like
I feel
we're
like
not far removed from our discriminatory past. We're
Right.
not.
I also think like we like as a white person, I do not know or could ever comprehend what someone of a different race has like their experiences and what they've gone through. So it's like for me, I personally like struggle. I'm like, how can I even talk to this? Because I have like I can't even imagine what some of the things that like people have been through, and where it's like I totally understand where you're
for
coming
sure.
from with the like just not because I like also kind of deal
Yeah.
with that, but then it's also like they have a completely different experience on which they can like they are the only ones that
Right.
can speak on that, and I feel like as like a person I need to be able to respect that and like kind of do what I can to change and like fix that for the better and push
Right.
forward.
Yeah.
I agree. I feel like it'd be
Yes.
doing, like, I am white, I am privileged. That's just how it is, and I feel like it'd be doing a disservice to any person of color to act like their race doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does
I feel
matter, and I feel like it does a
Yeah,
disservice
for
to
sure.
our country and to people who are so
Hello.
discriminated against.
Line cards, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Mine's down at the end.
Oh, you're that one. Okay, gotcha.
Oh, sorry.
You gotta leave the study group now. You're the last. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Well,
anyways, yeah.
like I grew up in a small town. Like there was 2,000 people, and it was all like white. I think there was like 1 or 2 minority families. And so like when I came to Lincoln, it was like kind of shock for me because I was really sheltered and kind of naive about a lot of the stuff. Like the problems with like trying to word this right. Just like how like there was like police brutality against like African Americans and like other minorities and all that. Like we didn't talk about that in my school because it was all
Yeah.
white. We focused on pretty much.
I think it kind of just goes on like what you have experienced and what you've seen. To like a small extent, like I understand what you're coming from. Like you were sheltered, like you had no idea. I feel like, I mean, I don't really know how this ties into the question, but like I mentioned before, like going out of country to a third world country, you see like the differences like between like what we have and and what they have and what we and they don't have. So I think that also has definitely like swayed my opinion on why I think like because I don't feel comfortable saying that like we're better off than someone else even though we may be. I just feel like that's kind of rude, but that's just how it is.
Yeah, and I think when, especially as a person of color, sometimes when people try to like say that they don't see color, it's kind of like they just don't want to be held accountable. Like
Right.
they just, there's like that whole like sort of idea of like white guilt where they want to be like, well, I wasn't part of this and I wasn't around during Jim Crow, so how's it my fault? But it's like it's not that it's your fault. It's just that like you benefit in a way that like like me or like other minorities can't.
And that's what I meant by like since I am white and privileged, I feel like not that it's like my responsibility, but I want it to be my responsibility to understand that and use my privilege to not
the issue is like
negate
when you try to be like, I don't see color and we're all the same, so like what's the issue here? Then no one's working on changing the infrastructure to actually like, again, it's the whole equality versus equity thing.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it really like I just think it's so interesting. Like everyone's different experience. Like you coming from a small town didn't talk about it versus us who lived 5 minutes away from each other and like the
when you
differences
said that, I was
between
like,
our schools and like I know coming from a predominantly white school, like we had an incident at our school. I don't know if you remember this, but we had a kid in our I don't even know like who he was, but some random kid wrote like the N-word all over the bathroom stalls.
That was my senior year, your senior class.
Yeah, it was all over the bathroom stalls, and like it was like went everywhere.
It went viral.
Viral. Like our school, like media was coming to our school, like all of these protest groups were coming to our school, and it was like because of one kid, like that is the image that our high school got from that, and I think like I know that a lot of groups like really tried to make an effort and a push to try and like make the people of color at our school feel welcome, and there was a lot of I mean like even when I left as a senior, like there was still a lot of you could see it like in the halls where people hung out and stuff, and I don't know, I just like again going back to like I want it to be my responsibility to try and make that and push it forward.
I think that ties in. I think it was said last week in class. I don't remember who said it, but he said he was a person of color, but he tried to avoid using. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like he grew up in a neighborhood that like that was like integrated into their culture. But, like he's like one now who's like trying to avoid it because he doesn't see like the sense in saying.
Well, because like it was used as a derogatory term back then. Like, why would you want to?
I think that's a different kind of argument and discussion.
But yeah, tying back into the
I mean,
just
like,
to tie
I just
back.
wanted to say because like it slightly went in like with what you were saying, like how you want to like make them feel welcome, and I feel like that's also part of like.
Going back to the theories, I feel like the theories more like help categorize people within their own race.
Mm-hmm.
So like for cultural capital, like there's a difference between like a Bill Gates type of white person versus like someone that grows up without money, like. Like they still had like a harder time like to get through and like get to school and all that stuff. But then I feel like where the theories start to not cross is like a white person that grows up poor and a black person grows up poor. Like the white person will still have an upper advantage because they would never have to deal with like legal systems or anything trying to bring them down on top of that. So I feel like the theories more like help people within their own race, like categorize them.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, because like it's not completely the same, but like being wealthy and white in America, I mean wealthy and black in America is a lot more level playing field than when you get to below middle class is when it really starts to show the huge difference between races, which goes back to being wealthy is having capital.
Should we want to move to question 4 or did
yeah, so question 4 is in relation to more contemporary race relations, how can we engage with the social constructionist perspective while also making sense of the real threats related to race and ethnicity in the United States? So I think what I think this is asking is that if race is a social construction, then like how do we use that to deal with the very real like threats that happen to minorities? Like obviously police brutality is a big one. Like going into like Black Lives Matter and how a lot of people are like I think that also kind of goes into like the All Lives Matter movement where people are like I don't see color and all lives should matter, but it's
Exactly.
like black lives
We
are the
should
ones that are at
recognize-
risk
yeah.
here. Like obviously, like if you have to be told that all lives matter, then you're a psychopath. Like you shouldn't though. But obviously, like I feel like that kind of like erases the problem with like looking at everything from like a social constructionist perspective and be like it's all in our heads, nothing matters. Is like then you kind of erase like or try to like play down the actual issues and like try to ignore like oh like black people are being incarcerated, they're being like killed by police, and I feel like a lot of people are trying to be like oh it's because they break the law, but it's like that's not the case. Like there's obviously inherent prejudice that manifests itself in like a very physical way.
And I think if you were to ask a white person, like, or if you were like, say this to a white person, a black person, like, oh, it doesn't matter, you would get two completely different responses. And I think, again, it's just so important to recognize, like, people have different experiences and they, like, why is it fair to, like, for us to be like, oh, it doesn't matter? Like, yes, it does matter because they have gone through stuff that we could not even imagine. And, like, we need to acknowledge their experiences and recognize that it is important because, like, there is, again, today, there's so
history.
much stuff that is still relevant today, and, like, just working on what we can do, I don't know, I just think it's important to acknowledge that.
Right, and I think, at least, like, we attempt to acknowledge it, like, with, there are holidays that have been set in stone, and whoever went to the Ruby Bridges talk, she was able to share her story, and, like, things like the bus boycotts or, like, the segregation of schools aren't necessarily happening today, but they're still, like, that's, like, part of the history that we have to acknowledge. Like, those are things that they've gone through, and people of color today are experiencing different things, but they're still going through stuff that us as white people don't necessarily experience.
I feel like part of white privilege is being able to say that you don't care. But like obviously, like if you're a person of color, especially if like you're a black man in America, like you can't not care. It's part of your daily life.
We talked about this in my English class last semester. We just spent like 4 weeks talking about white privilege, and we watched a documentary about it. And it was, I don't remember her name, some comedian, Chelsea, I don't know, it's on Netflix. But she was trying to do a documentary about it and like what it means, what people of color have, like their understanding of white privilege versus the understanding of a white person's understanding of white privilege. And I guess there was a lot of controversy, and you could see that like some people, like some white people don't see that there is differences, and they don't acknowledge the differences that should be acknowledged, at least.
I feel like those people are like ignorance is bliss. Like those.
Those
are the type of people.
But then again, the people who don't acknowledge it are the people that have high status and are rich and wealthy.
Yeah,
and
like they can
so yeah.
Which is, I think, why it's such a big issue in politics, because politics is predominantly rich, white, old men. So that's why, like, a lot of policy, like, we might talk about it on social media and have discussions in college classrooms and in our friend groups, but it's not addressed at, I feel like, the higher, like, political level like it needs to be, because those are the people with the capital that, like, it doesn't matter to them. It doesn't affect them, and that's why nothing's
they don't want
getting
Those
done.
are people that can do stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
they're like want to stay the way it is. They want it to be the way it is.
Right, like people.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of the focus, especially in policy, is getting rid of racist policy, which is fine. But you also have to create policy that benefits like people of color, because again, it's like the equality equity thing. Like you're not placed at the same level. Correct.
I kind of have like just like a question. Like, okay, so how everyone or like most of politics like is predominantly white, male, old men. I feel like in our lifetime, we have seen more of
That
we see more of an integration, and I guess my question is like, how do you guys think that's gonna change more like our future, like within the next like couple years, that like the years that we're gonna be alive? Like, do you think there's gonna be a big change, or do you think it'll just be kind of like a slow because like thinking about our generation and how we deal with racism versus how older generations like.
I feel like it'll still kind of go a little slow because, like, you don't see a lot of minorities like really still like wanting to go into politics and stuff. Cause like I remember like growing up, like my entire life, like people tell me like, oh yeah, you could be a good football player, a good basketball player, whatever. So that a lot of like minority people just try to go and play sports because they figure like that's their only way out.
Yeah.
So like a lot of them don't try to become lawyers and politicians and stuff. So I feel like the only way you could truly change is if someone that has grown up in that situation and like has lived that life becomes the one that is able to like change rules and like have power and stuff. So I feel like until there's like enough or there's a good portion of all types of races, then I feel like we truly will not be able to get there. And if we do, it'll take a lot longer than how long it should.
Well, I feel like when you like to talk about like how they just think like they can do the sports and they can't go into politics, I feel
Yeah.
like you can apply like social capital theory to it because it's all about like social networking. It's like
Yeah.
minorities, they don't get like the chance to like get really good relationships with like
Mhm.
politicians and stuff because they don't like there's not a lot of things that offer that. They're not like trying to
Yeah.
integrate them into
Yeah,
the system.
and again, like it can also be like if you go into higher education, but you know that you'll be discriminated against in the
Exactly.
workplace, like the motivation is gone.
Yeah.
Like no one walks into an inner city school and is like, oh, look at all these future lawyers and politicians.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But like you could walk into like a nice, school in a rich neighborhood and be like, okay, all these people have a chance, maybe some of these people can go to Harvard, Ivy
Yeah.
League schools and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So then and those are the schools like if you want to become like, a top official in the United States, like you have to go to one of those schools. Like that's like the common theme. So I feel like just the fact that like you could walk into the inner city school and like that's not the first thing that will cross your mind. It just shows like where everyone's mindsets are.
Yeah, and I feel like tying into that, something that's been circulating on social media too, along with the kind of like you can't walk in an inner city school and find that compared to the suburbs, is also there was this thing going on about how, same with the military, like you're told that you can be a good football player, basketball player, whatever, or the military. It's not like you can go to Harvard and the thing of like military boosts like being set up in like a lot more inner city schools and like rich white schools. That was like a conversation going on recently. Like we put people in boxes, and if it kind of goes into another sociological theory, labeling theory. When you label someone as something, they start to feel like they can't be anything but that label.
Yeah.
And I feel like that ties into a lot of the issues still today and why it's going to be a slow climb to. And I don't think we're really going to see it in our lifetime. I don't think it'll be a lot better, but I don't think it's another one generation fix. I don't.
I think it's gonna take a few generations.
I don't think it's gonna like not
Yeah,
change
somewhere
in
close.
No, it'll
No,
definitely
I-
change, and it has been
yeah.
slowly. But
We're at kind of like the starting.
like
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like the
Point where-
recent movements have been kind of like a catalyst, and I think like it's gotten to the point where a lot of people are very aware of what
I think we're
changes
like
need to be made. We just haven't.
I think our generation is like I think it was you or all of you guys who said it was like this starting point, but I do think we are more open to
I think
Change.
also like social media kind of
With-
makes everything
yeah.
go faster.
a lot of things will spread more that way.
Well, do we have any final thoughts? Or I think we pretty much hit all the questions. So
I think we're
good. Okay. All right.